My name is Linda Thompson. I'm 65 years old, and I live in a two-story colonial-style home in Brookline, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. A house that I bought piece by piece over the years, saving every dollar from my 35 years as a registered nurse working exhausting double shifts at Massachusetts General Hospital, a house where I raised three daughters alone after my husband walked out when the youngest was barely 2. A house that holds the echoes of scraped knees I once kissed, lullabies sung at midnight, and birthday candles blown out with squeals of joy. But that November afternoon, as the chill of autumn clung to the air, and neighbors had already begun draping Christmas lights across porches, I realized I was sitting inside the very place my girls now saw as nothing more than real estate. Not home, not memory, not sacrifice, just property. I had spent the whole morning preparing a meal the way I used to when they were little, hoping foolishly that a warm table could melt whatever coldness had grown between us. Herb-roasted turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, cornbread stuffing, green beans tossed with almonds, and a pumpkin pie with fresh whipped cream. Every dish a piece of my love disguised as food. My hands swollen and stiff from arthritis, but still steady enough to fold napkins into little fans, to polish the silver, to light candles, in hopes of recreating the glow of family I once believed was unbreakable. And when the front door finally opened, I looked up with the stupid hope of a child waiting for a smile, only to feel my stomach tighten as my oldest, Elizabeth, 39 years old, walked in first, her hair perfectly smoothed into a bun, her pearl earrings catching the light, the dark blazer she wore practically screaming her success as a financial advisor downtown, her expression tight, as though being here was an inconvenience. Then came Hannah, 36, heels striking against the hardwood like a judge's gavel, her designer purse swinging from her wrist, every step announcing her superiority. And finally, Rachel, my baby, 33 now, the one who once cried if she couldn't sleep beside me, breezed in with her law degree confidence, her voice clipped as she said, "Hi, Mom," like my home was nothing but a sterile office where she had an appointment she wanted to rush through. They sat, not embracing me, not commenting on the food, their eyes darting around as if calculating square footage. And Elizabeth spoke first, with that razor-edged voice she probably used to cut down clients. "Mom, this has to stop. This house is far too big for you, you're not getting any younger, and honestly, it's wasteful for a woman your age to live here alone." And those words sliced through me. Wasteful. Too old. Theatrics. As if 35 years of sacrifice meant nothing. So I tried to defend myself, whispering, "This is my home. Every brick bought with my overtime, every window washed with my own hands. This is where I raised you girls when no one else was there." But Hannah leaned forward with that syrupy smile that always preceded cruelty. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a yard, a deck. You don't need all this space. You'd be better off in a retirement community where people can actually take care of you." And then Rachel, my baby, I once carried against my chest every night, delivered the cruelest cut. Her lawyer's tone cold and precise. "It's the sensible thing, Mom, and let's be honest, this property is worth a fortune. If we sell it, you'd have plenty to live on, and we could finally cover some financial obligations we've been struggling with." And suddenly, it all became clear. Their urgency wasn't about my safety or my comfort. It was about the money, about cashing in on the life I had bled for, about turning my sacrifice into their bailout plan. And as I stared at their faces, faces I once thought reflected my own love, I found nothing but calculation and greed, as if I were already gone, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle between them and their payday. That night, after my daughters left without touching so much as a spoonful of the dinner I had poured my heart into, without even hugging me goodbye, I sat alone in the living room, the same living room where I had once rocked them to sleep in an old wooden chair, and I cried until my chest hurt and my eyes swelled shut. But between those tears, something inside me shifted. A seed of anger and dignity that I hadn't let myself feel in years began to stir. And I realized what they didn't know, what they had forgotten in their arrogance, was that their mother had never been weak. Their mother had worked night after night standing on swollen feet. Their mother had learned to survive abandonment and poverty. Their mother had made it through things much worse than three ungrateful daughters scheming to take what she built. Still, the betrayal cut deep because it wasn't just about the house. It was about the years I had sacrificed for them. The endless overtime shifts I worked so Elizabeth could attend her private high school when she swore it was the only way she could get into Harvard. The student loans I co-signed and paid off for Hannah when she wanted to go to design school in New York and said she would pay me back when she got her dream job. The heirloom jewelry I pawned to buy Rachel a laptop and pay for LSAT prep courses when she told me being a lawyer was her destiny. Every penny I had scraped together went into their futures while I skipped meals, patched the soles of my shoes with tape, and ate peanut butter sandwiches night after night just so they could eat balanced meals. And now those same girls were sitting at my table calling my life a waste. I remembered vividly when Elizabeth was 18 and told me she needed a $20,000 down payment for her college housing, how I took on every extra shift the hospital would give me, how I came home with blisters on my feet and a back that ached so badly I had to sleep in a recliner for weeks, but I did it, and she never even mentioned paying me back. Or when Hannah turned 16 and begged me for a quinceañera-style party, even though we weren't Mexican, she wanted the whole glamorous spectacle with a rented hall, a live band, a dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage, and because I couldn't stand to see her disappointed, I borrowed money from my credit union and paid for it. All for her to now sit across from me and tell me I had already lived my life. And Rachel, my sweet Rachel, the one who clung to me every night because she was terrified of the dark, the one I sold my own wedding ring to pay for her bar exam fees, she was the one who had looked me in the eye earlier and said this house would be better sold because it was worth a fortune. My own baby had reduced my blood, my sweat, my tears to dollar signs on a ledger. I sat there on the sofa replaying every lie they had told me to get money out of me. The times Elizabeth came by with flowers and said she just wanted to check in, then asked for $5,000 for unexpected bills. The nights Hannah called me in tears about credit card debt and I wired her money only to see her posting pictures of expensive vacations in the Caribbean a week later. The evenings Rachel cooked me dinner, pretending to spend time with me, just to butter me up before asking me to co-sign the lease for her fancy law office downtown. They had been robbing me for years, but I had called it love. I had called it helping, because that's what mothers do. They give until nothing is left, and that's what I had become. An empty shell sitting in a silent house while the women I raised plotted to erase me from it. But as I sat there staring at the flickering candle I hadn't blown out, watching the wax drip like wasted time, I felt something else spark. Defiance. The kind that reminded me of my own mother who once stood in front of a landlord and refused to be bullied out of our apartment when I was a child. The kind that had carried me through nights when I thought I would collapse from exhaustion but kept going because I had three little mouths depending on me. The kind I had buried for too long under guilt and misplaced generosity. And I said to myself out loud, they're right about one thing. It is time someone responsible made decisions about this house. And that person is me. And for the first time in decades, I decided I wasn't going to cry about what my children thought of me. I was going to make choices for myself, choices they would never see coming. And as the clock struck midnight and the cold November wind rattled against my windows, I promised myself that I would no longer be invisible, that Linda Thompson was going to rise from the ashes of motherhood's endless sacrifices and take back the dignity she had so carelessly handed away. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds in sharp lines across the wooden floor, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like jumping up to cook or clean or run errands for anyone but myself. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a notepad, staring at the silence of my house and realizing that silence didn't have to mean loneliness. It could mean control. It could mean freedom. And as I sipped the bitter liquid, I began writing down everything my daughters had ever borrowed, begged for, or manipulated out of me. The thousands I had spent on college tuitions, bailouts for their reckless spending, vacations I never took but funded for them. Weddings I paid for when their fathers-in-law refused to contribute. The credit card debt I covered when they maxed out their limits. The cars I helped them buy. The list stretched over 4 pages before I even reached the present. And when I looked at the total in rough figures, it was nearly $900,000 over the course of 3 decades. $900,000 of my life poured into 3 women who now wanted to cast me out of my own home. My hand shook as I held the pen, not from weakness but from fury at myself for letting it happen. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. A conversation with my old colleague, Mary Jacobs, back when we both worked nights at the hospital. She used to say, "Linda, you have to protect yourself legally because love makes children greedy when they think their parent will always save them." At the time, I had laughed it off, too naive to believe my girls would ever turn on me. But now those words burned in my ears. And so after finishing my coffee, I picked up the phone and dialed Mary, who had long since retired to Florida, but still knew more about practical survival than anyone I'd ever met. And when she answered and heard the tremble in my voice, she didn't hesitate. She said, "Honey, go see an estate lawyer today. Don't wait. Don't tell them a thing. And make sure your will and your deed are ironclad." Her bluntness snapped me into action because I realized my daughters weren't just threatening me emotionally. They were circling like vultures, waiting to strip me of everything. And if I didn't act, I would be left with nothing but regret. I showered, dressed in my plain gray slacks and a wool sweater, and took the train into Boston, my hands stuffed deep into my pockets as if I could hide the ache in my chest. And I walked into the law office of Jonathan Pierce, a name Mary had given me. A man with kind gray eyes behind rimless glasses who listened patiently as I spilled everything. The dinner, the demands, the years of financial drain, the way they had begun circling the house like sharks around blood. And when I finished, his lips tightened as he leaned back and said, "Mrs. Thompson, I see this more often than you'd believe. And the best thing you can do now is establish legal protections that leave no room for manipulation." He explained trusts, living wills, transfer on death deeds, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of safety, like someone was finally putting a lock on a door that had been wide open for too long. We spent hours drafting documents, papers that would guarantee the house remained in my name until the day I died, with specific instructions that it would only pass to my chosen heir, not automatically to all 3 daughters, but to one person I could trust. And as I signed those papers, the scratching of the pen against thick parchment-like paper felt like the sound of chains breaking, each signature a reminder that I was reclaiming control. Jonathan even suggested I set up a new bank account where I would move my savings, separate from the accounts my daughters had access to, accounts they often drained with emergency withdrawals. And though my heart ached at the thought that I couldn't even trust my own children with access, the sharper truth was that they had forfeited that trust long ago. I had just refused to see it. Leaving the office with a folder of documents tucked under my arm, I walked through the crisp Boston air with my scarf pulled tight, and for the first time in years, I felt taller, steadier, like the world wasn't closing in, but opening up. And as I reached the train station, a group of college students brushed past me laughing, and I realized how young I had been when I first took on the weight of motherhood, how much of my identity had been swallowed up by their needs, and how little I had kept for myself. And I whispered under my breath, "No more, Linda, no more," determined that from that day forward I would no longer live as a doormat in the home I built. I would live as its rightful queen, whether my daughters liked it or not. And the thought of their shocked faces when they discovered I had already secured my future without them warmed me more than the thickest winter coat ever could. When I returned home from the lawyer's office that evening, clutching the folder of documents like a shield, the house felt different. Not just a structure of wood and brick, but a fortress that finally belonged to me again. And though the silence inside was the same as it had been the night before, it no longer rang hollow. Instead, it felt protective, like the calm after a storm when you realize the roof held strong. And I made myself a simple dinner of scrambled eggs and toast, sat at the kitchen table, and allowed myself a rare smile because, for once, I wasn't drowning in their demands. But I also knew my daughters wouldn't give up so easily. They had tasted the possibility of money, and greed doesn't vanish overnight. So I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation, which came sooner than I expected. The very next Sunday, Elizabeth showed up unannounced, her car pulling into the driveway with the aggression of someone who believed ownership already belonged to her, and she walked in without knocking, setting her designer purse on my counter as if staking a claim, and said, "Mom, I've been looking into listings. Houses around here are going for over $1 million. If we act fast, we could all benefit." Her tone, polished and professional, like she was delivering a business pitch, but when I quietly slid my coffee mug aside and replied, "Elizabeth, this house is not for sale. Not now, not ever, and I've already made arrangements that guarantee it stays mine." Her face blanched for the first time, the mask of corporate confidence slipping, and she stammered, "What do you mean arrangements?" And I simply said, "It means you and your sisters can stop circling me like wolves because this house will not be your payday." And the silence between us thickened until she muttered something under her breath about me being manipulated by outsiders and stormed out, her heels stabbing the hardwood like accusations. I thought I'd have at least a week of peace, but 2 nights later, Hannah and Rachel came together, their car pulling up with the engine running like they planned a quick strike, and when they walked in, Hannah's voice was syrupy sweet. "Mom, we're just worried about you. It's not safe for you here alone. You could fall, you could get sick. Don't you want to be around people who can care for you?" And Rachel, trying to soften her lawyer-sharp edges, added, "We're only thinking about your best interests, Mom. If we sold, you'd have plenty of money to move into one of those luxury retirement communities. You'd never have to lift a finger again." But when I looked into their eyes, all I saw was calculation, and I felt the same surge of steel in my chest that I had felt signing those documents. So I leaned forward and said, "Girls, let me be perfectly clear. I am not moving. I am not selling, and I am not signing anything you put in front of me. So stop pretending this is about me, because it's about you, your debts, your greed, and your entitlement." And the words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, leaving them blinking in stunned silence before Hannah finally hissed, "You've lost your mind, Mom. You've always been dramatic, and now you're just being selfish." And Rachel muttered, "We'll see about that," before they both stormed out, their slammed car door rattling the windows. I sat alone again, but this time, instead of tears, I felt fire. Because I realized they weren't just trying to manipulate me, they were escalating. And if I didn't stay 2 steps ahead, they'd find a way to corner me, maybe even legally. And that night, I pulled out the folder Jonathan had given me and read every clause again, memorizing my protections like a soldier memorizing a battle plan. Because this wasn't just about keeping my house, it was about keeping my dignity. And I swore to myself that no matter how ugly it got, Linda Thompson was not going to be bullied out of her own home by the very daughters she had nearly destroyed herself to raise. The following weeks felt like a chess match, where every move I made to protect myself was countered by a new tactic from my daughters. And I quickly learned that greed can turn blood into enemies faster than any stranger ever could, because one by one they tried new ways to wear me down. Starting with Elizabeth, who showed up one afternoon with a stack of brochures for senior living communities, glossy pamphlets filled with pictures of smiling retirees playing tennis or sipping wine on balconies. And she spread them across my dining table like evidence in a courtroom, saying, "Mom, look how happy you could be. No responsibilities, no bills, no maintenance, just fun." And I almost laughed because she was describing a life I had never known. My life had been anything but easy, and the thought of trading my independence for a curated cage enraged me. So I pushed the pamphlets back across the table and said firmly, "No, Elizabeth, happiness isn't something you buy with a monthly fee, and I won't be tucked away like an old coat you don't want cluttering your closet." And when she realized I wouldn't budge, her expression hardened into something colder than I had ever seen. The smile slipping away like a mask peeled off too quickly, and she muttered, "You'll regret this," before storming out. Then came Hannah, whose approach was more insidious. She called me constantly at odd hours, always with her fake, sugary tone. "Mom, how are you? Are you eating enough? Don't you get lonely in that big house?" But no matter how she dressed it up, her questions always circled back to the same point. Wouldn't you feel safer if you weren't alone in that place? Until one night, fed up with her persistence, I snapped, "Hannah, stop pretending you care about my safety. You only care about the money, and I'm done listening to the lies." And there was a long pause on the phone before she whispered, "You've really changed, Mom. You're not the woman who raised us," and then hung up. leaving me shaking with rage at the audacity of her trying to weaponize motherhood against me. But the worst came from Rachel, my youngest, the one who always knew how to play the victim. Because a week later, she showed up on my porch with tears in her eyes, holding her infant son in her arms, saying, "Mom, please, I don't know what to do. We're drowning in debt. If we can't sell this house, we'll lose everything." And for a moment, my heart almost cracked, almost reached out for the baby's tiny fingers. But then I remembered the documents in my safe, the legal protections she didn't know about. And I realized this was just another performance, another act in the theater of manipulation. And I told her gently but firmly, "Rachel, I love you, and I love that little boy, but I am not giving up my home to solve your mistakes." And the tears vanished from her face like a switch flipped, replaced by the cold, sharp look of a lawyer preparing to attack. And she spat, "Then don't expect me to bring him around here anymore. If you can't help us, you don't deserve to be in his life." And walked away without a glance back, leaving me clutching the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping me upright, the echo of her threat ringing in my ears, because that was when it hit me. They weren't just trying to strip me of my house, they were willing to strip me of family, of love, of my role as a grandmother, all as leverage for money. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the ticking clock loud as a drum, and I told myself over and over, they may take their visits, they may take their smiles, but they will not take my home. Because in that moment, I knew I wasn't just defending four walls and a roof, I was defending the last piece of myself they hadn't already stolen. And if it meant losing the illusion of family to keep my dignity, then I was ready to face that loss head on, stronger than ever before.
I should have known that once emotional pleas and guilt trips failed, my daughters would take things to the next level. But I wasn't prepared for the cold, calculated cruelty of their next move. Because one chilly morning in December, I opened my mailbox to find a thick envelope with legal letterhead. And when I tore it open with trembling fingers, I saw that Rachel, my own baby, had filed a petition claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my estate, attaching statements signed by both Elizabeth and Hannah, claiming I was forgetful, confused, and incapable of living alone. And as I read those lies, my chest tightened until I thought I might collapse, because here it was in black and white, my own children trying to strip me of legal control over my life. And I staggered back into the house, clutching the papers like evidence of a crime, because that's what it felt like, a betrayal so criminal it burned. I called Jonathan, my lawyer, my voice shaking as I read him the accusations, and he listened calmly before saying, "Linda, don't panic. This is a common tactic, and as long as we can prove you're competent, and we will, you have nothing to fear. But you need to be ready for a fight." And hearing the word fight steadied me, because I realized that's exactly what this had become. Not a family dispute, but a war. And I refused to lose. Over the next weeks, I endured evaluations from doctors who tested my memory, my reasoning, my independence, and I passed every one. Though the humiliation of having to prove to strangers that I wasn't some senile fool nearly broke me. Especially when I caught Elizabeth sitting in the waiting room with her smug little smirk, as if she expected me to fail, as if she were already planning how she'd redecorate my kitchen once she had me locked away in a nursing home. But each time I thought of giving in, of just collapsing under the weight of it, I remembered all the nights I had carried them when they were sick, all the sacrifices I had made when their father abandoned us, and I said to myself, "No, Linda, you did not survive all that to be destroyed by the very daughters you kept alive." And when the court date came, I walked into that cold room in my best navy blue suit, my hair brushed neatly back, and I looked every bit the capable woman I had always been, while my daughters sat together at the other table, whispering like vultures circling a wounded animal. But when the judge asked me simple questions about my life, what year it was, who the president was, what medications I took, I answered clearly and confidently, my voice steady as a rock. And when Jonathan handed over evidence of my meticulous bill payments, my clean health reports, and even affidavits from neighbors who vouched for my independence, the judge dismissed the petition with a sharp rap of his gavel, calling it frivolous and unfounded. And I watched Rachel's face fall, Elizabeth's lips tighten, Hannah's eyes dart away. And in that moment, I felt not just vindicated, but reborn, because I realized I wasn't just surviving their attacks, I was winning. And as I walked out of the courthouse into the biting winter air, I whispered to myself, They'll never see me crumble again. And for the first time in a long while, I actually believed it. Still, the victory was bittersweet because as I rode home on the train, I stared out the window at the snow-dusted city streets and thought about the little girls they once were, the way they used to run into my arms after school, the way they used to beg me to sing them to sleep. And I wondered how those girls had turned into these women, strangers, willing to destroy me for money. And though my heart ached with that question, my resolve hardened, because if they wanted a war, they were going to learn that Linda Thompson was a far stronger opponent than they had ever imagined.
I had thought that after the humiliation of losing in court, my daughters might finally back off, that maybe shame would settle in and remind them of the bond between us. But instead, the opposite happened, as though defeat only sharpened their hunger, and soon their tactics turned darker, less legal, and more personal, starting with Elizabeth, who began calling neighbors and extended family, spinning lies about me being paranoid and unstable, so that people I'd known for years started giving me wary looks at the grocery store, whispering behind their carts as though I were contagious. And when I confronted her about it, she simply smirked and said, "Well, Mom, people talk. Maybe if you weren't so defensive, they wouldn't believe it." As if gaslighting me were a sport. Then Hannah launched her own campaign, posting pictures online of my house, writing captions about how it was unsafe for an old woman to live alone, and beneath her posts, strangers commented cruel things about selfish parents who cling to property instead of letting their children have security. Comments I knew were seeded by my own flesh and blood, and though I told myself not to read them, the words burrowed into me like thorns. But the cruelest was Rachel, who had always known my weak spot, my love for her little boy. Because one Sunday, when I tried calling to check on him, she answered curtly and said, "You made your choice, Mom, so don't expect to see him anymore," and hung up before I could even whisper goodbye. And that broke something in me deeper than any lawsuit or rumor ever could, because grandchildren are supposed to be the second chance at joy life gives you, and mine was being dangled like bait in a cruel game. Yet even through the pain, I refused to let them see me collapse. I refused to let their cruelty undo the strength I had rebuilt. So I leaned harder on the people who still cared, like my neighbor Susan, who started dropping by with coffee and saying, "Don't you listen to them, Linda. Anyone can see you're sharper than half the folks in this town." Or Jonathan, my lawyer, who told me, "The more noise they make, the worse they look if this ever escalates again." And slowly, I began to see that their desperation wasn't proof of power, but of weakness. Because if they had truly believed their own lies, they wouldn't need to scream them so loudly. Still, the harassment wore on me until one freezing January night when I came home from the pharmacy and found my front door ajar. My stomach lurching as I stepped inside to see drawers pulled open, papers scattered, jewelry boxes overturned, but nothing of real value taken. Only the folder Jonathan had given me with copies of my legal protections was missing. And that told me everything I needed to know, because it wasn't strangers who had broken into my home. It was someone who wanted those documents gone. And though I had backups at Jonathan's office, the violation rattled me to my core. My safe place infiltrated, the very walls that had always sheltered me, now scarred by betrayal. But instead of calling my daughters in anger, I called the police and filed a report naming them as my only suspects. And when the officer asked gently if I was sure, I looked him dead in the eye and said yes, because no stranger would know what to look for. And in that moment, I felt something shift. No longer a mother excusing bad behavior, no longer a victim swallowing cruelty, but a woman drawing a line in the sand, daring her enemies, even if they were her own flesh and blood, to cross it again. That night, I installed new locks, bought security cameras, and slept with my phone by my bed, not because I was afraid, but because I was ready. And as I lay there listening to the winter wind rattle the shutters, I whispered to myself, "They've taken my trust, they've taken my peace, but they will never take my home." And I drifted into sleep, not as a broken mother, but as a fighter prepared for whatever the final battle would bring. The final breaking point came not with another lawsuit or rumor, but with a family dinner invitation that arrived in late February. A text from Elizabeth that read, "Let's all meet at Hannah's house Sunday. We need to talk like a family." And though every instinct screamed it was a trap, I agreed. Not out of hope for reconciliation, but because I wanted to face them on their turf, to look them in the eyes and let them know once and for all that their war was over. So that Sunday, I drove through icy streets and parked outside Hannah's sprawling colonial, my breath fogging as I walked up the stone path and rang the bell. And when the door opened, all three of them were there. Elizabeth with her arms crossed, Hannah with a glass of wine already in her hand, Rachel pacing with her phone like she was preparing to present evidence in court. And the moment I stepped inside, I felt the tension thick as smoke, the air humming with the unspoken understanding that this wasn't a reunion, it was an ambush. And sure enough, as soon as I sat down, Rachel launched into a speech about responsibility and long-term planning, pulling out printed papers that she slid across the table, documents that would give them joint power of attorney over my finances and medical decisions, her eyes gleaming with the same cold precision I'd seen in that courtroom weeks earlier. And Elizabeth chimed in about streamlining assets, while Hannah leaned closer with her fake concern, saying, "Mom, we just want to make sure you're taken care of. It's for your own good." And as I stared at those papers, fury simmered so hot in my chest I thought I might explode. But instead, I felt something calmer, stronger, like steel cooling into its permanent shape. And I pushed the papers back across the table without touching them and said clearly, "No, I will not sign. Not today, not ever. And if you ever try to force me again, you will regret it." And the stunned silence that followed was almost sweet. But I wasn't done, because I had come prepared with my own folder, documents notarized and sealed that I laid on the table like trump cards, explaining that not only had I secured my home in a trust, but I had also amended my will so that none of them would receive a dime of inheritance, that instead everything would go to my grandson's college fund under the management of an independent trustee, bypassing their greedy hands entirely. And the look on Rachel's face when she realized her threats to keep me from my grandson had backfired was priceless. Her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, while Elizabeth turned pale and Hannah slammed her wine glass down so hard it shattered. But I didn't flinch. I simply stood and said, "I gave you my youth, my money, my love, and you repaid me with betrayal. But the one thing you will never take from me is my dignity. And from this moment on, you will learn to live without my support." And with that, I walked out, my heels clicking across their polished floors, the cold night air outside greeting me like freedom itself. In the weeks that followed, they tried calling, begging, even threatening. But I stopped answering. I blocked their numbers. I replaced their presence with people who truly valued me, like Susan, my neighbor who became my closest friend, and the church community that welcomed me with open arms when I finally walked through their doors one Sunday after years of staying home. And slowly, I built a new life not centered on being their servant, but on being myself. Gardening in the mornings, volunteering at the hospital a few hours a week, even joining a local book club where I laughed until my cheeks ached with women my age who reminded me I wasn't alone. That family doesn't always mean blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when you need them most. And though the ache of losing my daughters never fully faded, it transformed into something else. Not guilt or despair, but acceptance. Because I realized that protecting myself didn't mean I failed as a mother. It meant I finally succeeded as a woman, reclaiming the dignity I had buried under decades of sacrifice. And one quiet spring afternoon, as I sat on my porch with the scent of lilacs drifting through the air, I whispered to myself, "This house is mine, this peace is mine, and my life belongs to me again." And for the first time in decades, I felt truly, undeniably free.